they brought him in on a plane.
He was still in his jumpsuit at the time.
They didn't have any winter clothing, so it was like minus 50 outside because this is Kazakhstan in the middle of the steppe in the winter. And the American soldiers who were handing them over to the Kazakh authorities didn't know exactly how they should be treating them. Are they still prisoners or are they free?
Hi, I'm Claire Ward. I produced Life After Guantanamo, documentary about Lutfi Ben Ali, a former Guantanamo detainee who was resettled to Kazakhstan. Simon and I went there earlier this year and reported on his life now that he's been transferred to a country that isn't his home.
We went to Kazakhstan because we wanted to find out what life is like after Guantanamo, what happens to the people after they spend sometimes over a decade in prison and then are sent sometimes to their home country, sometimes somewhere else. In this case, the Tunisian detainee was sent to Kazakhstan and he was declared by the United States government to be a free man, and we wanted to find out just how free he actually was. So we headed out there. We didn't warn any of the authorities that we were coming because we didn't want them to switch things up or make things look better than they actually were. And we got a pretty raw picture of what life was like. And we've been taking questions over the last couple of days over Twitter and over Skype. And we've got some callers on Skype right now who are going to ask us some questions live about what that trip was like. So let's get started.
Yeah, thanks Simon and Claire for coming on. First person that we have on Skype is Mitchell Williams, who's calling us from sunny New York. Well, it's not exactly sunny, but it's New York. So hey, Mitchell.
Hey, really love the piece. Thought it was incredible. I just kind of wanted to know, it seemed like from the minute that you got there to Kazakhstan, you were like running into roadblocks with the police and the officials, and, you weren't getting the answers that you needed from the Red Crescent. So I'm just wondering, from a journalist perspective, what are the other big challenges you faced when you were in the country that maybe we didn't see in the piece?
I feel like we actually put a lot of what happened into the piece, and we didn't leave anything out, except for stuff that was repetition and wasn't really relevant. Like what you saw is essentially what happened to us. We did get followed by police or by somebody, it's hard to say. We were followed because, we went around a block a couple of times to make sure that the car behind us was indeed following us on one occasion. I think that was actually the first night that we showed up in town. I suppose the only thing that we didn't put into the piece is we were a little bit concerned after we discovered that we were being followed that our footage might be confiscated. We didn't have any indication that was going to happen, but just the fact that we were being followed made us think that could be a risk. And so at one point, when we got super paranoid, we started getting all of our cards, our memory cards together and like stuffing them into our underpants.
Sorry. Yes, I have now burned them. It was stressful for me being behind the camera because you really stand out when you do that, especially in a town like Semey. It's kind of a sleepy, small city in eastern Kazakhstan, and everything appears to be quite orderly, and walking around with Lutfi, who is quite tall and commands a certain presence in a community where he doesn't really fit in. We were definitely a very conspicuous small crew. Apart from being followed, I faced the challenge of not speaking Russian. So Simon, who was doing the reporting and interacting with the authorities, knew what dynamics were forming as they were happening, whereas I was kind of in the dark. And so my instinct was, just keep rolling. This may be relevant, it may not be. They may seize my camera, but it was sort of a call I had to make in the moment. And sometimes that's footage you cut out of a documentary because it's when you got shut down. It's when you didn't get to do the thing that you set out to do. But in our case, it actually helped illustrate how difficult it is to just visit a former Guantanamo detainee. And we wanted that to help viewers understand that this freedom that he's allegedly got in Kazakhstan isn't really what we understand to be freedom. There are actually a lot of limitations on who can see him and when that we weren't aware of. They wouldn't actually spell out what those rules were, but they made it very clear that we weren't welcome from the beginning. So yeah, so hiding footage, there were all kinds of other small roadblocks that put us on edge, like actually getting onto the airplane, crossing the tarmac in Sime. There's something that we do. We like to film all the connective tissue where our hosts or correspondents are traveling in between locations, right? So I just had a 5D camera. I wanted to film Simon just getting on the airplane, just climbing up the stairs. And the moment I pulled out the 5D, and typically airports are pretty restrictive about what kind of photography you can do. So I was taking a risk, acting like a tourist, I guess, just pulling out my camera to take a picture of a friend. And the moment I pulled it up, there was an arm on my elbow that by a man who was clearly watching us and observing that I was trying to do some filming, and shut me down immediately. And then Simon yelled at me and told me to put my camera away.
Well, the thing was that this was at the end of our shoot when we had basically gotten all of our footage together. And once you have all of your footage, that little heap of cards in your hands is worth the entire value of your entire production. And risking losing that for one shot of me climbing onto a plane, I was like, what the hell are you doing? And then it's like, this is strategic object, you cannot film. And somehow we didn't get the footage confiscated.
Right,
and everything was okay.
and we do things to mitigate the risk of having footage taken, like making copies and storing them in different places and stuff like that. It was a risk I shouldn't have taken, but sometimes you can get away with getting those shots, sometimes you can't. So that was definitely an environment where it was maybe a risk I shouldn't have taken. Sorry, Simon. I got yelled at a lot on this shoot. But, again, like filming in countries where you don't speak the language is something we often do, and it comes with certain risks of just not understanding.
But no, it's good to have a cameraman who basically, for them, the default is film, not don't film. Because sometimes you get people who are too shy and end up missing stuff and don't want to take any risks and are overcautious. So that's not good either.
Okay.
Great. I guess, and then my other question would be, how was that meal that you had? How was the pasta and the salad and
the liver?
And the liver, yeah, the nuclear liver. How was that?
It was actually really, really good. Lutfi, the former detainee, lived in Italy for a while before he moved to Pakistan, which is where he was arrested by the Pakistani authorities and then handed over to the American authorities. He used to help out, as he said, a friend at an Italian restaurant, so he knew the basics of pasta cooking. The chicken actually looked amazing, but we didn't get to eat the chicken because the first night we arrived at his house, he'd baked us a chicken, and then the Red Crescent and the police showed up, and we had to leave. And so I don't know what happened to that chicken.
Well, he didn't eat it. He threw it away. So one scene that we didn't include in the documentary is after we got kicked out, because we didn't have a meal and we had just been traveling for 48 hours, we went to a restaurant. And we were followed, right? So we also thought, let's not go to the hotel right away. We went to a restaurant and Skyped Lutfi to see how he was doing, because that was clearly a stressful interaction for him. He invited us to come out and visit him, and next thing he knows, the authorities are at his door. He's trying to break fast. It was Ramadan at the time. All of the stress was visited on him, and he's already a very sick, kind of stressed out person.
Yeah, keep in mind he's got an artificial heart valve. So
any kind of additional stress is dangerous for him. And so anyway, we called him and asked him how he was doing. This got cut, but he said that he was really upset. He wasn't able to sleep. He threw out the food. He didn't eat that night, which is dangerous for someone with a health condition like his. He really needs to keep himself strong. So it was sad. And one thing about the cooking and eating together thing that I found so remarkable is that Lutfi has very little money to spend. He now has a small allowance that's given to him by the local Red Crescent, but when he initially got there, they didn't have anything. So he had no spending money. He couldn't buy his own food. Now that he can, he spends it on visitors. He splashed out on us. I know that was a considerable expense for him, and I just think that it says something about him as a person, that he was generous and invited us in and wanted to cook for us. It's culturally, it was important to him to actually sit down and have a meal and not just be in an interview context and in contexts like the Red Crescent, where again, it's discussing his circumstances and not learning about who he is as a person.
I think we've actually got a clip from that first night at his house when we showed up and we were about to eat and the authorities came in. We went to meet with Lutfi with the impression that he's a free man, but it was clear we weren't welcome.
Нет, он не является частным гражданином. Он дан стране в Казахстане.
Да.
Он получатель проекта «Адаптация беженцев в Республике Казахстан». Он даже не является таковым беженцем. Он не имеет статуса никакого. Понимаете, это уже вы что-то нарушаете. Вы не понимаете это?
Мы же не ожидали вас здесь встретить.
Слушайте, я как меньше всего вас ожидала здесь встретить.
В их интересах.
Я вынуждена руководство, конечно, позвать.
So the woman doing most of the talking there is Alfia. She's the head of, or was the head of the Red Crescent Society in Simei, in that town that we were in. And she then, after that, called the police, and then they showed up, and then we really had to go. But interesting enough, Claire was talking with Lutfi on Skype yesterday to get an update on his life, and it turns out that she's actually been fired as the head of the local Red Crescent branch, probably because of our film.
He didn't say fired exactly, he said replaced, like someone else has the job, but that was the implication, yeah. But Lutfi gave me an update in his life. I wanted to mention, I don't know if anyone has that question coming up later, but we brought him paints as a part of the trip. His attorney, who is based in New Jersey, had a number of supplies he wanted to send to Lutfi because Lutfi has so little, including paint supplies, because he had said to us early on that he wants to start painting as a hobby. He has very little to do. And he showed me a number of paintings he's done, something like a dozen still lifes of flower arrangements. So he's finding an artistic hobby in his time where he's got very little else to do. But he hasn't actually received any additional medical care. That's an important follow-up. The film really centered on the fact that he's got this heart condition that he's very concerned about. He's also got a number of other maladies, and he has a lot of trouble explaining it to the hospital, the people that he interacts with at the hospital because of the language barrier. And he showed me that his feet were incredibly swollen right now. His circulation's not good. So in the videos, he held up his feet to show me, and he says he can barely walk right now. So a little concerned for his health and safety in his current condition. But we're gonna continue to follow up with him and check in from time to time.
So thanks for the question. I think we're gonna go to our next question. And by the way, if you're watching, you can still send questions via Twitter and we will answer them.
That's right. And we actually got a question via Twitter, from this guy named Nick Charles. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this, rather. So Simon, Claire, how was it to interview someone who allegedly was tortured in Guantanamo? How deeply did you discuss his experiences of being a detainee?
Well, we went into quite a bit of detail about his experience being tortured, but we didn't put it into the film. We put some of it into the film, but we didn't go as deeply into it as we wanted to, and we might actually do a follow-up and recut that interview to talk more about the torture later on. But the reason we didn't put it on this time is because we felt that the story was sort of not about what the whole Guantanamo experience was like, but what happens to people after they get let go from Guantanamo. And I think there's been a lot of reporting on the torture that took place, most of which, as far as I understand, took place with detainees before they were transferred to Guantanamo when they were held at CIA black sites. And Lutfi actually went into some detail about that. So I don't want to spoil it. So once that does come out, it should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and as for interviewing someone who has been tortured and is talking about very traumatic experiences, we were sensitive to that. The master interview with Lutfi was actually about 5 hours long. And we made a point of doing it in the daytime at a separate location outside of his apartment, where we could kind of relax, take breaks, let him stop to pray. He did that at least once just during that interview. It's not easy asking someone to revisit the most painful experiences in their lives. So I think Simon can speak to what that's like being across the table from him, but I think it requires a certain tact and also a sensitivity to the fact that you may be asking someone to relive something that they very much want to forget, right? That can't have been easy.
Yeah, no, I think you done answered that one.
Done answered it?
Yeah.
I think you guys are done answering this too. So let's talk to our next Skype guest. Let's go ahead and say hey to Scott, who's calling us from beautiful Boulder.
I want to thank you guys for doing this work. Most of the mainstream media doesn't really cover these kinds of stories. You don't get a 30-minute interview about what it's like to live as a post-Guantanamo detainee. So I really love the work you guys have been doing, and I've been a fan for years. But my first question, I'm a little nasally. I'm under the weather right now, so bear with me. But since Guantanamo detainees are not given due process, we can only guess, but what percentage of Gitmo detainees can we estimate are seemingly innocent like Lofty?
Well, like you said, none of the detainees have had real trials. Some of them are having military trials in Guantanamo itself. So it's basically impossible to make a judgment about whether a person is guilty or not. And I don't really see it as our job to try to make that kind of a judgment, because the idea of our legal system is that you give people due process and to have their day in court if you accuse them of something, and if you don't, then you just don't jail them, and it's not really about what did or didn't happen, because that could be anybody's guess. I think the important thing to remember, though, is that as far back as 2004, and then again in 2006, the Defense Department produced documents that stated that they didn't consider Lutfi to be dangerous and that he should be transferred or released. So for years, almost a decade already, has passed now since they made that judgment. And so the real question is, if they thought he wasn't dangerous and their bureaucracy decided that he could be released, why did they keep him in prison as long as he did? As long as they did, and why were the wheels of bureaucracy turning so slowly for so many detainees at Guantanamo, not just him? That's what really beggars belief for me, is that the Defense Department knew that this guy wasn't useful to them, yet they held him for so long.
Yeah. There was a recent opportunity for Obama to veto a bill that would have all of the Gitmo detainees transferred to the United States, which I assume would also entail that they would get a trial. But that what didn't happen. I think it passed the Senate like 94-6 or something. My other question was, why does he think that this happened to him?
That's a good question. Lutfi doesn't have any idea why this happened to him. I mean, we know why they picked him up. In early ARB, that's the Administrative Review Board at JTF Gitmo that does sort of detainee assessments periodically to kind of go over why they were brought in and to see if there's any change in what is known about the detainees' involvements with Al-Qaeda or what have you. They had said that he was known to have stayed in an Al-Qaeda affiliated guest house in Afghanistan. So keep in mind that Lutfi lived in Italy for quite some time, and then in 1998 moved to Pakistan, and then moved in between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We don't know exactly what dates and when, but we know that he had left Italy, had spent a good chunk of his life there, and speaks Italian, was very much kind of living in Italian culture for a time. But living in Pakistan, visiting Afghanistan, the U.S. authorities said that he was known to have stayed in guest houses, which had also at some time housed al-Qaeda. They also said that he was involved in the Tunisian Combat Group, which was based in Milan at a mosque called the Islamic Cultural Institute, which was shut down in 2002, I believe. He denies all of this. He says, socially he interacted with people who may or may not have been affiliated with radical Islamist networks. He didn't know. And that's the answer he gives us in the piece. And he repeats that. He says, culturally, these are tight-knit communities. You may be interacting socially with people and you don't know what they're up to otherwise. And that's the benefit of the doubt that he wasn't given. So that sheer association with people who were known to be criminals was enough to pick him up.
He did give kind of an answer about why he thought he was picked up. Yeah. Well, he was saying that there was a campaign against Arabs going on in Pakistan right after 9/11, and basically there were a lot of Arabs in Pakistan, and the Pakistani authorities decided that they were suspicious following the events of 9/11, and they started arresting dozens and dozens of people, and some of those guys were then transferred to the American authorities based on interrogations that may have been interviews that may have been extracted under torture. Right. And so it's quite possible that what happened was that he got picked up. This is what he says, actually, is that because he was an Arab, he was picked up, and then somebody informed on him, and he was handed over to the Americans. And by that time, everything they had on him was already secondhand through the Pakistani authorities. So I hope that answers your questions. Do you have anything else for us?
No, that's it.
Cool. All right, well, let's see what else we got. What do you have for us, Michael?
I got a bunch of stuff for you, Simon. Let's go ahead and say hey to Bianca, who's calling us on Skype. So, Bianca, you there?
Yes. Hi, Simon. Hi, Claire. How are you guys?
Hey, Bianca.
Shaka Armour has recently been released from Guantanamo and has been flown back to England. And I wanted to know whether he will have to deal with any of the restrictions faced by those who have been sent to Kazakhstan, and what life will be like for him in England.
So we're not reporting specifically on Shaka Armour, so I can't say with any definitive authority that I know what his life is going to be like. I know he was repatriated to his home country, which was the case for many detainees, not like Lutfi, who was sent somewhere else. I think reintegration is going to be a lot easier for Shaka compared with Lutfi's situation. Shaka's now with his family. He's able to be in a place that is very familiar, where he speaks the language, where he probably still has ties that will make, he's been held since 2002, so it's not going to be easy for any of these people. But what interested us about Lutfi is that he was one of a minority of detainees. I mean, most detainees were repatriated to their home countries, but some were sent to these countries that they had absolutely no connection to, and we didn't understand why. And there's very little information out there that explains why certain countries have agreed to take on former Guantanamo detainees. Those arrangements are made at a very high level. Delegations come and visit Guantanamo, high-level discussions are had, and then next thing you know, December 31st, 2014, 5 detainees are sent on a military plane halfway around the world, and they're released into the hands of the authorities of a country which they've never been to before. I mean, it was a bizarre sort of circumstance, and hearing Lutfi talk about it was actually really fascinating, something we also didn't include in the film. I don't know if you want to describe what he
I read through some of the transcripts that were made of pre-interviews that Claire had done, and basically, if I'm right, they brought him in on a plane.
Mm-hmm. He was still in his jumpsuit at the time.
They didn't have any winter clothing, so it was like minus 50 outside, because this is Kazakhstan in the middle of the steppe in the winter.
Which is like Siberia, right?
Yeah. And the American soldiers who were handing them over to the Kazakh authorities didn't know exactly how they should be treating them. Are they still prisoners or are they free? They want their handcuffs back. So they have a discussion about, do we replace the handcuffs with plastic zip ties? and then give them with their hands tied to the authorities, because the moment of transfer is like a confusing moment of like what's happening with these people. And in the end, they decide not to go with the zip ties and just to give them hands unbound to the Kazakh soldiers over there, who then give them a winter coat. Who then give them a winter coat and drive them off to their new wonderful life in northeastern Kazakhstan.
Right, so you can't say for sure what makes those detainees any different to Shaka Amar. You can't.
Well, I mean, I think that I'm sure that there's going to be some level of surveillance of him in the UK, most likely, but it might be more subtle than what Lutfi is experiencing in Kazakhstan, where really they're not even trying to hide the fact that they're following him, and they have the keys to his apartment, and they walk into the apartment to check up on him pretty much without knocking whenever they feel like it. I don't think that sort of thing can happen in the UK, but you know, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And there's also a much more active press in the UK that's going to be looking into Shakar's experience, right? The thing about detainees sent to places like Eastern Kazakhstan is it takes a mighty budget and a lot of willpower to get out there and to get through the, you know, the authorities and those hurdles to actually visit and assess what the circumstances are like. So a main thing that concerns me is that there are no reports coming out of Kazakhstan press
not at all.
about his situation at all, and I haven't seen any follow-up reporting in Semey at all about Lutfi's situation.
Well, you got to understand that Kazakhstan is a militantly secular dictatorship, essentially, and there's a very, very limited freedom of speech, and the press essentially publishes things that the government is going to be okay with. So there's very little criticism of the way things get handled, but especially, you know, what they perceive to be a national security issue as well. Kazakhstan is incredibly concerned and paranoid about the fact that it's going to have its own Islamist uprising of some kind. Some Kazakhs have been seen in ISIS videos in Syria, and the Kazakh authorities, who are secular, you know, come from this sort of tradition of the Soviet Union, are terrified of that happening in Kazakhstan. So they're trying to keep as tight a lid on it as possible. And you know, these people who were in Guantanamo, whether they were innocent or guilty, doesn't matter. Just by dint of having been in Guantanamo, they're branded reputationally as being terrorists. So that's what people think of them.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, we have a clip of the Red Crescent meeting that we attended, where the director of the Red Crescent at the time talks about Lutfi's circumstances, and you can kind of get a sense from what she's saying what the cultural attitudes towards Lutfi might be in the place he's been resettled. So, Michael, why don't we take a look at that?
Сколько у нас малоимущих, сколько у нас стариков одиноких, сколько у нас многодетных семей живут намного хуже, чем он что, национальный герой для Казахстана, что ему такие условия и привилегии.
And the other thing that you didn't see there that that woman said was, you know, that he should shave his beard off, or he should dress more appropriately, because the way he looks, you know, it's very scary for local people, and that he doesn't listen to any of her advice, and that's why he has all of the problems adjusting that he does. They come from a very, very different culture. The two men in Semey. We met another ex-detainee as well, and you know, the challenges for them are so great that they actually literally told us that they preferred. Well, one of them, Sabri, told us that he might prefer even going back to Guantanamo, as outrageous as that sounds. We've got that clip as well.
أنا عندي رسالة هي هدفين، إني أطلع من البلد هذه أو أرجع إلى غوانتنامو. هذا اللي أريد.
وين تطلع؟
أطلع إلى أي مكان، ما أريد أي مكان. أنا أريد أخرج من هذه البلد إلى بلد أخرى، أو إني أرجع إلى المعتقل غوانتنامو الذي كنت فيه، لأنه ما في فرق. كلها عملة واحدة، يعني هي وجهين لعملة واحدة. هذا 24 ساعة وراي. هذا تظنه جاي هكذا اللي حب في عيني. حقيقة يعني حقيقة، يعني الأمريكان رمونا هكذا الرمية وبدون ما يحسبوا فينا. طيب أنت تقول أنا.
All right, let's go before the police get here. So I don't know, there might be a bit of hyperbole in what he was saying there, but the message is pretty clear, is that they're having a really, really hard time in Kazakhstan, and they've got very little support. And because they don't have any community around them that can help them get integrated, they feel isolated, like they're in prison. And I think that's what he's saying, is like being in Kazakhstan, in a place where you don't know anybody and sitting in your apartment all day, where people walk in with keys and check up on you and follow you around, is kind of the same as being in Guantanamo to some extent. Yeah. That's the message. So I think we've got 2 more callers and a slew of questions on Twitter. So hopefully we've answered your question and we can answer some more.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bianca. And Simon, we do have a slew of questions coming in on Twitter. I want to take a look at this one that Aiden Barry sent us. A lot of people have actually asked us this question. And I know this is speculative, but what would happen if the former detainees attempted to leave Kazakhstan? I mean, is that something that's even feasible? Or could you talk to us a little bit more about where Semeh is?
It's absolutely not feasible in any legal sense. At the moment, Lutfi and the other detainees don't have papers. They don't have identification documents. And they're not even considered
They're not considered refugees.
No, they're considered asylum seekers, I think, in whatever
Except asylum
system.
Seekers, under the normal circumstances, have a piece of paper that says they're an asylum seeker.
Yeah.
And they haven't even been given that. So what they're officially termed as, according to Red Crescent, is recipients of the program,
Right.
which is, not really a legal status.
At all. So if he attempted to leave, I mean, I would be very worried for him, because I think with the amount of surveillance he's under and the amount of scrutiny, it wouldn't go well. And he certainly is aware of that. Every time I speak with him, he is saying how badly he just wants to have any kind of document that states his status so that he can visit one of the other detainees who lives in a different town. He has absolutely no freedom of movement, is the answer.
All right. Well, I hope that answered your question, guys. So there's one more tweet I want you to take a look at, but don't answer it quite yet. Haley wants to know, how did you even find a source like Lutfi? And before you answer that, let's have our last Skype caller come up, and this is Galib, who anybody who watched the piece might recognize. So let's say hey to Galib.
Hey, Galib.
Galib, how are you?
How you going, guys? How are you?
So let me introduce Galib. Galib is a legal assistant, a legal aide to Mark Denbo, who is Lutfi's lawyer, and he came out with us to Kazakhstan and helped with translation, and also was out there to try to find out what Lutfi's condition was like himself, so that he could report back to Lutfi's lawyer. And Galib has a question for us.
Thank you for having me on, and miss you guys, of course. And
Miss you
I think my question is, when we initially, I guess, sat down to introduce you to who Lutfi was, and then we actually went over and met him, was he the same person that you envisioned? Did you have a picture of what a Guantanamo detainee might be like, and was he that same person when you left and finally finished the piece?
Spoken like a true human rights lawyer. I love that question, because you're right. I mean, and this is something that we wanted to do in the film itself. We wanted to defy people's own expectations of what kind of person a Guantanamo detainee would be, and we did that in how we structured the film. So the first scene is Simon sitting down with you and Mark Denbo, the attorney who represents Lutfi Ben Ali, and we speak to him over Skype from your living room. And it's, sort of bad video quality. We're speaking in this kind of broken telephone manner where you're translating for us, and we're all trying to get to know each other, but it's a bit awkward. And he's obviously in this entirely different context and is wondering what these journalists want, and maybe a little suspicious of what we're up to, because he's just seeing us on this tiny screen with very poor internet quality. So what we wanted to do was kind of take that, because that might be what you'd expect, that's the extent to which you can interact with people who are so far removed from us here in the United States, and who have been cast under so much kind of suspicion by the US government. And what we wanted to do was take that kind of predictable portrayal of a detainee and then completely change your mind about him by going, visiting him, seeing what he's like as a person. I'm reading Just Mercy right now, which is a book I recommend. It's by Brian Stevenson, and it's all about a mitigation narrative in people who have been accused of and convicted of crimes, right? And part of what he talks about is humanizing people who've been accused of things so that they can get a fair treatment in court and also by the public. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to do. We were creating a mitigation narrative for Lutfi bin Ali, who has otherwise been cast away by the United States government and is expected to rebuild his life after 12 years of detention without trial in a place that is hostile to him. So he definitely changed my mind by being very cordial, generous, forthcoming, and maybe you can say what your experience was.
Well, no, I've actually got a question for you, Galib, because you worked with Mark Denbo and you were part of the reason that he ended up in Kazakhstan. Did you what did you expect from that country for him? Was it, what you had hoped it would be when you were fighting to get him out of Guantanamo so that he could be anywhere, at least, and not behind bars?
So in the discussions, I wasn't privy to the discussions of actually getting him signed up to go to Kazakhstan. But from what I recall, it was just a preliminary thing. Kazakhstan was brought up on the table. I know Tunisia, his home country was also brought up, but Tunisia was willing to take him in. So he was, the Tunisian government post-revolution was willing to take him in. Everything was good. But then the U.S. government refused to send him to Tunisia. So, it wasn't, then Italy was another choice, of course, since he wanted to go to Italy. So Kazakhstan was definitely not the top choice, and there were other options, but the other options just either fizzled out due to the U.S. government's denial or fizzled out because of, for example, in Italy, there was some pressure probably from the EU on not accepting any detainees or more refugees. So when Kazakhstan came up on the table, I think the intention was, okay, it's a Muslim country. Everyone there is going to be Muslim. He's going to flow in. There's going to be mosques. Everyone will be fasting. And, he can just go with the flow. There's likely going to be a bunch of people who are, speak Arabic due to, the religion. And, I guess similar probably, if you go to Pakistan, they're not Arab, but they have a lot of Arab speakers because of their religious ties. And Kazakhstan was totally not what we were expecting, especially seeming. We expected, for example, like a main city or a major city where you can just blend in. Where he was thrown is completely different.
Yeah, you had mentioned something when we were waiting for Alfia and the Red Crescent to meet with us on that second day. You had mentioned that the state of the facilities there surprised you. Do you want to explain what you were talking about?
So
you said you worked in a lot of impoverished developing countries, or you've been to a lot of places where you've seen healthcare facilities, for example, in much better state than what we saw there.
Yeah. So it's so for example, when we went into the Red Crescent, there was a scene there where that was in the video of showing a little bit of the Red Crescent, how it looked like. It was very, very poor, very it seemed like. But that's how it seemed was the norm there. It seemed like it was kind of like a backwards or, very, not up and coming. They're not, up to date with, I guess, what we would call, the 21st century in any sense of the world.
We've actually got a clip from the ICRC. It doesn't completely, totally refer to what you're talking about in terms of the medical treatment facilities, but it is the office of the ICRC, and it gives you a sort of sense of what the area is like. We were talking again to Alfia, the head of the Red Crescent in Semey. Let's have a look at it. We contacted the ICRC, who told us that detainees like Lutfi are not actually under their care. They said, these individuals are not under our care, and we would suggest also not under the care of the Kazakh Red Crescent Society, in the sense of having responsibility for their status. However, we are attentive to their situation and wish for them to be well adapted in their new countries. So if the Red Crescent is strictly offering humanitarian aid to detainees, then why all the rules? And whose rules are they?
Do you have the documents that explains what your tasks are and what your responsibilities are?
Естественно, есть, но я вам их не буду показывать.
Our subsequent requests to see the details of the resettlement agreement between the U.S. and Kazakhstan were denied. So the International Committee for the Red Cross, Red Crescent is an organization based in Switzerland, and the Red Crescent in Kazakhstan is a completely independent organization that's associated with that global body, and they run their own things their own way. And you know, we had the ICRC telling us that neither they or the Red Crescent was responsible for these people's well-being and care, but that simply wasn't true from our experience of having been there. And you saw that office with the wood paneling and Alfia there, you know, basically not telling us, but more importantly, not telling Lutfi what rights he had and what rules they were supposed to abide by.
Yeah, which kind of explains why Lutfi and Sabri, the other detainee we visited, refer to Kazakhstan as their Guantanamo too. You know, what they're saying is that there's still, it's worse than prison because at least in prison, the rules are clear and you're being told where to go and what to do. I mean, there's at least some consistency. They've got absolutely no sense of where the limitations are and what rights and freedoms they do have. And that just totally contradicts the very early statement by a high-level US official when they were initially released that these men, for all intents and purposes, are free. And that's what I found the most disturbing for these former detainees is that they're in this solitude where they don't speak the language and they have no sense of the timeline of when things will ever change for them. So, you know.
Michael, do we have time for the clip which sort of really illustrates how unclear it is whether they're free or not when we were trying to get Lutfi to come with us to go to the market?
Yes, I mean, we got time for anything you want. Let's take a look at this clip.
Lutfi might not be in leg shackles, but maybe more of an invisible leash. Despite Alfia's assurances, we didn't get very far when we tried to leave with him.
Ты куда пошел? В мечеть? Мечеть? Сейчас? А русский язык?
Потому что он постится, он пропустит урок. We're leaving together.
Нет, транспорт у нас есть.
Окей, он едет с нами.
Нет, он пропускает русский язык только ради вас.
Что значит только ради вас? К нему никогда никто не приезжал, вы говорите только ради нас.
Нет, внизите.
У него русский язык каждую неделю, а вы говорите...
Он говорит, ему пассист, надо ехать домой. Так.
Только что в той комнате она сказала, что они свободны, за ними слежки нет, на них нету кандалей. Они могут делать все, что они хотят. Вот это прозвучало в той комнате. Теперь мы видим реальную ситуацию, где вы от нас не отстаете, и что он не может принимать решения самостоятельно. Let's go. That was some nice shooting, Claire.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tom. That was some good arguing with authorities. What I liked about this piece was that we essentially took a claim that these detainees are free and we crash tested it. We went there to actually see if that claim was true. It was a really simple premise and it allowed us to get a pretty frank and clear assessment of what the circumstances are. So for me, this documentary was it was a very interesting experiment in testing just exactly, you know, what it means when we say in these vague terms that people have status, which they don't in fact actually have.
So thank you guys all for coming onto the show. Thank you, Galib. Thank you, the rest of you, for sending Twitter questions to us. And we will see you, or you will in fact see other Vice News correspondents talking about other programs that they've made next week on The Line. I brought Galib out to this area outside of Semey to show him what kind of a country his client has landed in. This is the part of Kazakhstan where the Soviet Union liked to test its nuclear weapons. Over 450 of them were detonated here, 100 above ground. So radiation levels in this area are well above the norm, which is why this town is completely abandoned. Hey, look, there's a gas mask. But traditionally, Kazakhstan has always been a place of exile. The Soviet Union sent its unwanted people to live out the rest of their lives here, And now the United States is doing the same thing to its unwanted former Guantanamo detainees.